let's talk about whole section. So what are you noticing in that section that would make it count as like a stream of consciousness narration? So obviously it like feels all over the place. It kind of like sort of gut reaction. We know that this is describing his thought processes, but if you had to prove it, where would you point to in this to show this is thought processes? Yeah.
It's not really a specific point, but it's the fact that there's like absolutely no dialogue. Like there's no interactions between characters.
Yeah.
Like it's just straight up his thoughts, like observing things. So there's like no quotations between the one thing.
Yeah, that's a great point. So he doesn't feel the need to represent what other people are saying in this little section. So he doesn't have any of these like storyteller tendencies. If we're thinking about what's going on in his head, he's not trying to like represent the events as a story. And instead we really get what feels like pure thought then. And it's like very, I'm not saying this in a negative way, but it's very self-centered, the way that our thoughts usually are. You know, it's not like we are usually thinking from other people's perspectives. Okay, what else makes it seem like stream of consciousness? So lack of dialogue, that's a good one. Yeah, Asher.
It's a lot less restrained than I'd imagine usually is other people. Like he, without hesitation, tries to, he says that if there is a God, what the hell is he for? And then later he immediately talks about throwing rocks at people.
Yeah, and at their faces, right? Okay, good. So there's no sort of like social restrictions on what he is thinking about. Like maybe he's got some intrusive thoughts here, right? Like and what I think is so interesting is the juxtaposition between those two as well. Like he's thinking sort of philosophically, like, or religiously, do I believe in God? And if there is a God, like, why does he let these bad things happen? Why is he letting my mom die, right? What good is it praying to God if my mom is going to die? But then immediately that causes him to start thinking about throwing rocks at people's faces. And so that juxtaposition doesn't flow one to the other. We don't see a transition from one to the other. It is just like immediate. And so, yeah, there's this idea then that he's less restrained by social conventions. He's not going to throw rocks at people's faces. I guess that's a spoiler, but he's not going to do that. It's just the thought that he's kind of obsessing over. Yeah.
It reminds me of like when you're angry, but like you can't voice that, so you just kind of bottle it up.
Yes. Doesn't he seem like a bottler in this scene? And we do see the ways that it emerges from other people's narration. We see him like wrestling with his horse and being kind of cruel there. We see him ignoring Darl and walking ahead of him so that he doesn't have to like interact with someone who wants him to see the truth about their mom. So we do see it kind of like glimpses of it. But when you get inside his head, you get how bottled up that anger is. And I think part of that is how quickly it comes, and how I mean, the swear words too. Not that this guy, I'm sure this guy would swear out loud. He's a, you know, I don't know, poor Southern working man that doesn't really necessarily care about that aspect. But the way that like he's sort of like jumping from, you know, sawing to why you want her to die to they're all sitting here like buzzards. And it's like he has all of these different things that are pissing him off in this moment, but he's crammed them all into one tight little space. This is the only time we're going to get Jules' narration, by the way. This is it, just this one little section. And so this is like our one glimpse into how like emotionally fraught that space is. Okay, what else makes us know that this is stream of consciousness? I think there's more. Yeah.
The way he's talking, the way he's jumping around, and like the thought, it kind of reminds me like, you know, when you know that you're upset about something, but you don't know quite what, so you go and just like poke at different parts of your life.
Yes.
I don't think he's really upset at Dewey Dell for fanning his mom. He's just like thinking, what if this is what I'm upset about? Let's try exploring that for just a moment.
Yes, absolutely. So he doesn't seem like someone who is totally like rational or in touch with his emotions. He can't necessarily like feel his feelings. That's the therapy idea, right? Feel your feelings, like feel what that feels like, kind of sit on that for a while, and it will become more of a calm process for you. No, he's thinking his feelings and he's trying to, I like how you said, poke around, trying to discover the source of those feelings. We know what is making him so upset. His mom is dying, right? And instead of having this reaction like others have, which is like maybe grief, maybe a little bit of relief, whatever it is, his reaction to this death is anger sort of like at the universe for making this happen. And he's trying to ascribe that anger to something that will actually, like he can actually act out on. If he says, oh, I'm angry at Cash for building the coffin, well, then he can go and punch Cash in the face and he can get out that anger and he's gonna feel better. Right? But if he's angry at the idea that people die, there isn't anyone you can punch in the face for that. So I think that's him trying to like ascribe that anger. There's something else here, which is that this first paragraph, do you see how there's like no names in that? It's just he, she's, him, she, I, her. It just like goes through all these pronouns, right? I think that's a good sign of the stream of consciousness, because when you are thinking, you don't usually think in terms of names. When I'm thinking, I don't think, oh, it's, you know, my husband, Scott, who has made me, you know, upset this morning or whatever. No, it's just him. And I know who I'm talking about in my head, so I don't need to like have all these names. That's another way that we know he's not really concerned with telling a story here. He's concerned with, well, it's not like he is expressing his thoughts. It's just on the page, these thoughts build up Jules' mind. Jules is not a real person. He's just made up of words here. But anyway, what are there any other ways that we know that it's stream of consciousness that you thought of? There's one other thing I want to point out, which might have been confusing, but actually sounds great when you say it out loud. Like the last line, one lick less, and we could be quiet. Think about how that sounds. One lick less, one lick less, one lick less. Why do you think he's talking that way? What does that sound like? One lick less. It's a little bit earlier too.
Does it sound like the song?
Yes, exactly. The ad's going one lick less, one lick less, one lick less. So yeah, it's him like representing the sound in thoughts. Do you guys ever do that where a sound is repetitive and you start hearing a word in that sound? This is a very strange reference, but I have heard people talk about this with breast pumps, breast milk pumps, that people will like, it becomes like such a like monotonous sound over and over and over again that a lot of women like have words that it's saying. They're like, oh, it's this word over and over and over again. You start to hear that language in the sound. So it's a way that sound is represented in his head as words. And that is not the only time that this happens in this book. So I wanted to point that out too. Okay. All that being said, what do we learn then about Jewel as a character? I think we've said a lot here, but is there anything else in your groups that you were talking about that we learned about his character or the way that he's grieving his mother maybe? In this class, did we talk about that if it had just been me when Cash fell off the church and how confusing that line is? I'm not totally sure what that means, but look at that line again. If it had just been me when Cash fell off at the church, if it had just been me when Pa laid sick with that load of wood fell on him, it would not be happening with every bastard in the country coming in to stare at her. Because if there is a God, what the hell is he for? So it's referring to past events that we're going to hear about periodically over the course of the book. At some point earlier, Cash fell off a roof. He's a carpenter and he was working and he fell off the roof and he breaks his leg. And it's like a big deal that he has to convalesce and they don't have that income coming in. And then it also talks about how Pa laid sick when a load of wood fell on him. So when Jewel is obsessing about this, if it had just been me, if it had just been me, what do you think that is all about? Like, what is he trying to say there, Sammy?
He's not necessarily the breadwinner of the family, so it would have taken less out on the family.
Okay, so he's thinking if it would have just been me who fell off the roof or got hurt, that wouldn't have put like mom in this stressful position maybe, and potentially then she wouldn't be dying. Okay, yeah.
I think this is the part where he's poking every part of his life to find out what it is he's so upset with.
Mm-hmm.
This is the part where he tries to turn it on and himself, and then when he finds that he doesn't like that, he turns it on to God.
Oh, I love that. And then he turns it on to other people that he's going to throw rocks at because he maybe also doesn't like the idea that God is not on his side. Oh, I like that. So it's like, maybe this was my fault then, in the same way that Sammy was talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, good. There's another way we can think of it, because if you look, it says, if right after that it said, it would just be me and her on a high hill and me rolling the rocks down the hill. So yeah, Christiane.
Is he
Potentially. I mean, he seems like in it just for maybe a second there, if it had just been me, if it had just been me who was dying instead of my mom, it could have been. There's also this idea that if it had just been me, if there were no Cash, if there were no dad to put all this stress on mom, if it had just been me and my mom and none of these other fools in my family, then maybe we would have been sort of like, have this happy life with nobody sort of like buzzing around us. And we can't totally place that. That's another way we know it's stream of consciousness, because I don't think that like we can fully understand what that line means, but there's these different ways that he's thinking my family is to blame or I am to blame for her dying. Okay. And yeah, I think it reveals some deep insecurities then, where he's turned it back on himself, but he doesn't like that. He doesn't stay there that long. Jewel does not seem like a super insecure character. He gets over it very quickly. All right, here's what I want us to do. Sorry, I'm just looking around the groups. All right, Raquel, I want you to go with those three over there. I want you two to pair up with Grace and Sydney, and then I want you three to be together over here. All right. And we're going to look at different sections the same way we just looked at Jewel's section. So I want you guys, I don't know which, sorry, I got to make sure. Nope, it's in my other book. I want you guys to do Darrell's section on page 47. This is the one with all the italics. Yeah, they're all going to be confusing. Don't worry. So you guys in the middle here, you are doing Dewey Dell's section on page 58. I'm choosing the most confusing sections. So you're Dewey Dell's section. And then you guys are Vardaman's section on page 53, I believe.
That hurt my brain.
I love the way Vardaman thinks. I love it. All right.
I like chapter 19.
19, my mother is a fish. Is that it?
That was good. I mentioned that.
My mother is a fish. Yes. What does that mean? Chapter 18 is pretty clear to read too, I think. Cash is just, this is how I make a coffin. Okay, so what you are doing with your sections, you don't have to read them aloud, they're quite long, but you're looking through your section and you're trying to figure out both of those things that we were doing in the prompt. So one, how does this idea of stream of consciousness, the idea that we are seeing their thoughts on the page, affect the way we read the story? And you can think there about how do we know it's stream of consciousness? And then two, how does a glimpse into this person's brain, how does this glimpse into their thoughts reveal info about the character? All right. I'm just going to give you like 10 minutes to talk through this in your group. So it's not like you're giving a formal presentation or anything. I just want to divide the load and we'll just like visit with each group, not like informally after about what you talked about. So 10 minutes to figure out these two questions for your character. Okay, go ahead. Okay, if you were working at home, you can take any of those three. So either Darrell on page 47, Dewey Dell on page 58, or Vardaman on page 53. And you'll give me little notes about what you're discovering. So Darrell's section, this is on everyone page 47. For me, it is on right there. Okay, tell me what you what's going on in this section, what you discovered through closer examination.
So this is the section where like they actually like say like she's gone, she died.
Yeah.
This is kind of like how Darrell is dealing with it, and it has a lot of italics in it, and we kind of interpreted that as like sort of flashbacks to like him when he was gone with Jewel, like
Yeah.
when we get there $3 or whatever.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the big thing that showed us that it was stream of consciousness. We also said that kind of reveals that he doesn't like dealing with his feelings, like blaming himself or putting anything on him.
Wait, why does it reveal that? That's an interesting idea.
He's kind of always talking about like, oh, Dewey Dell's doing this, my dad's doing this, Vardaman's doing this. And as soon as he like starts to think about himself, he's like, oh, I remember when me and Jewel were gone. And like just kind of is always avoiding it and like kind of just finding it easy to deal with others than his own emotions.
That's so interesting, because do you guys remember the section that we are actually going to talk about in depth after Christmas break? But it's right at the end of where you read, where he's like, what is sleep? Sleep is not, is not, is me. You know, like, do you guys remember this section? That's totally, and when you are emptied for sleep, you are not. And when you are filled with sleep, you never were. I don't know what I am. So it kind of suggests that when he does start thinking about his own role in things, he starts to unravel a little bit. Like he is not sure of his own thought processes. So I really like this idea that he's sort of focused on others as a way of like keeping it all together so that he doesn't have to focus on himself. Anything else that you discovered in that section? This group? No? Okay, one thing I want to point out here, Darl is not there when his mom dies. So it's not actually a flashback. Maybe it is. It's very strange, but the italics differentiate between what Darl experienced when his mom died, and then the stuff that is not italicized is like what the rest of the family experienced. So Darl is giving this very detailed account of what happened when his mom died, even though he was not there. And I mean, it's detailed. Look on like the second page, the paragraph that starts, she lies back. It says, she lies back and turns her head without so much as glancing at Pa. She looks at Vardaman, her eyes, the life in them, rushing suddenly upon them. The two flames glare up for a steady instant, then they go out as though someone had leaned down and blown upon them. That's the moment that Addie dies right there. And he describes it with such detail, like about exactly what was happening to her eyes. And who she's looking at is Vardaman, who's a little kid. And we've seen from his sections is maybe not the clearest person who could describe what this moment was like. So how is that possible for Darl? This is open for the rest of the class. Yeah, sure.
I think that there's no reason to suggest that this is what happened. I think Darl, he's trying to like do this thing that like people who like are losing control of themselves do, where they try to assume they know everything that's happening on what's going on in the world and just paint a very detailed picture to feel in control of the world.
Yeah.
And because it doesn't matter exactly how she died, you can just solidify this image of what's happening.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I think that Darl is kind of a narrator, storyteller, poet, right? We talked about last time how he seems to be a poet in his descriptions. I think this is more detail about that. And it seems like maybe the psychological reason that he does these things is because he needs to grasp this kind of control. Through storytelling, he's grasping that kind of control so that he can pretend exactly what it was like when his mom dies. And remember, notice that nowhere in this scene is his mom sort of like saying, hey, where's Darl? Where's Jewel? Why aren't they here? Why isn't my whole family around them? There's no sort of distress that she's experiencing about Darl and Jewel not being there. So part of his narration is sort of like narrating himself and Jewel out of the emotional picture altogether so that he can just focus on sort of a more, I don't know, tidy conclusion to her life. Yeah.
I'm noticing like the first paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
Where he's like, it's where in his like sort of imagination, it says it's Jewel she wants, Dewey Dell says.
Oh, right.
Which I think goes like, she doesn't ask for Darl,
Mm-hmm.
but she does ask for Jewel, the favorite, or like the mom's in the story.
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about that. Someone does mention it. It's not Addie, but it's other people sort of speculating on her pain here. Yeah, and it's Jewel that Darl thinks that Addie would want then. So I think it's important to remember that as you read this scene, it is through Darl's perspective of what the death might have looked like, but not maybe the real death, as though there is a real death beyond what Darl narrates. Okay, let's talk about Dewey Dell's section. So this is on page 58 for everyone else. Okay, there's some awkward parts in this section. Tell me about what's going on in this and what we learned about Dewey Dell.
This part, her mom has just died, and I'm pretty sure what's technically happening right now is she's preparing dinner.
Mm-hmm.
But you almost can't tell by the way she's completely focused on her own events and her problems in her life. she mentions that her life is a tub of guts that's full and too full for anything else to be occurring in her life.
Mhm.
So like she's too worried about her own pregnancy and what she's going to do about it to like really focus on what she's doing. So,
Yes, good. And if we think about this in the context of her mom just dying, it kind of means that she's put off processing what that would mean for her too, because she's just so concerned with this pregnancy. When it's the first line, when she says he could do so much for me if he just would, what is she talking about?
Peabody.
Peabody. She's thinking about the doctor there. And she's like, the doctor could do so much for me if he just would. And I think this gives us an idea of where how Dewey Dell is trying to deal with her pregnancy. What do you think she wants Peabody to do for her? Yeah, I think that's what it is, right? Because he refuses. It says he could do if he just would. So it's like he could take care of this problem for me in terms of abortion, but he won't do that. Here we are in the South in the 30s. Abortion is not legal at all. And on that note, Christiane, have a good concert. And yeah, she's obsessed with guts. She keeps talking about guts. Why do you think it's guts? Yeah.
I think it's because the guts are like slimy and gross, and you're not. I don't know about fish cutting, but I don't think you eat the guts.
Yeah.
You like.
Unless you like them, unless you're a weirdo. Okay.
And I think it kind of like the description reminds me of how self-conscious she is of her own like problems in that moment, and like the guts are gross and she's focused on that, and her pregnancy is gross and she doesn't want it.
Okay, good. So she's actually thinking about like the physical quality of a pregnancy and how this is like gross to her, that the fish guts might remind her of the fact that she has guts too, and that like she's going to have to confront that because she's pregnant. Like most of the time we're not thinking about our own guts. If you're pregnant and your guts are changing a lot, I'm using guts to just mean insides, and your guts are changing a lot, you're forced to confront that idea that on the inside of you, your guts, you know? Yeah, Sammy.
I think it shows kind of this like almost grotesque vulnerability that she doesn't want.
Yes, when you say grotesque vulnerability, what does that mean?
Well, the like repetition of guts, and it kind of, I feel like the definition of guts jumps around a little bit. Stuff like her saying that she is Leif's guts.
Yeah. Okay, go to that part. What page is that on in the school? 60. So it says he could do everything for me. She's talking about Peabody. And you don't know it. He is his guts and I am my guts and I am Leif's guts. That's it. I don't tell you why he didn't stay in town. So just that little moment of he is his guts. She's talking about Peabody. He is his guts. I am my guts. And I am Leif's guts. Why does that produce this idea of like extreme vulnerability for her? Or for anyone, I think, who would be pregnant? Yeah.
She's not just her own person. She also has like Leif inside her.
Yes. Sorry, I know that's gross, but yes, it's like DNA, right?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
it's also his thing, and she has to do it.
Yes. Okay. So it's like through this idea of pregnancy for Dewey Dell, she used to be just her own guts. Like she used to be just she was her, right? She becomes pregnant and suddenly she's not just her anymore. And it's like, what is she then? Where does the baby start and I begin? Is the baby me? And if the baby is me, then am I Leif because the baby is also Leif? It's like this way that her identity is completely unraveling just because of this physical quality of being like one and both at the same time, maybe even one and three at the same time, me, baby, Leif. How do I like sort of see the differences between those? And you see this again when I think on the next page, maybe 2 pages later for you guys, the paragraph that starts, then I pass the stall. She says, I feel my body, my bones and flesh beginning to part and open upon the alone, and the process of coming unalone is terrible. Okay, we could read that as kind of like a dirty part of it, but I also think she's thinking metaphysically here about this idea that she is coming apart, and by coming apart, she's coming unalone. So it's like I used to be alone. I used to be sort of like a complete full person without like these barriers that sort of like threaten who I know I am. And now that I am pregnant, now that I have been with Leif, and now that I am pregnant, I'm not unalone anymore. And that is threatening. That's scary. That's really scary to her. Okay. Any other, yeah.
I think she's really self-conscious of her body at this moment.
Yeah,
And
when she's
like,
comparing it to the cow, right?
yeah, and like just that really awkward position where like the cow is like nuzzling her and she's like aware of like her body.
Yeah.
And she's like, I think that's also due to her pregnancy. She's
Yeah.
trying to hide it.
And I think before this, someone refers to her as a tomboy, right? I think it's Cora who refers to her as a tomboy. It does, yeah. And I think then it's like being a tomboy is a way of thinking about like a girl without femininity. And femininity is so much located in the body that as soon as she is pregnant, she has to realize I am also a woman. And I think that's what's going on with this cow too. It's like the cow has always been a woman. We know because we milk the cow and you know, she has to, whatever. The cow is very feminine, and cow is this feminine sort of, the cow is this feminine symbol. And so her interacting with this cow, she's like, oh my gosh, I am also a woman. I am also a girl. So it's this moment that, yeah, she's really aware of her body. And if she was indeed a tomboy before, like Cora says, then her becoming aware of her body is going to be an awkward experience for her, something she might want to reject too. Okay. Anything else you want to say about Dewey Dell? Yeah, Asher.
Just like the actual event of when she finds Vardaman, she's not super concerned about him. The main thing that she's concerned about is he spying on me? What does he know?
Yes, good. So it's that idea of being completely focused on her own issue right here, that she's blind to every other major issue that's going on around her. So here's her little brother who's just had to deal with his mother's death. And she's just like, what do you know? What do you know about me? Instead of thinking about like, hey, what are you going through right now? Which we're going to learn in the next group is something really intense.
Even worse is that Vardaman is acting suspicious. There is something wrong. And when she says, what did you do? Like, he's like, does she know? And then she's thinking the same thing. Does he know? Everyone's just terrified.
Yeah, yes, that's a good point, that they can't actually have this like family bonding experience through a painful moment because they are all so worried about everyone else, like what they know about each other. So they're in their grief, they're also extremely divided too, because nobody is ready to understand each other's grief. Interesting. Anything else about Dewey Dell from this section? The last line is pretty intense, where she says, I feel like a wet seed wild in the hot, blind earth. I think that goes with what Kayla is saying about her being like just so hyper aware of her body now. Yeah. Okay, Vardaman section's on page 53. Oh, little Vardaman. Such a little weirdo.
He's a child.
I really like him.
He has fish.
He does,
This is his mom.
except for it's not fish now.
He gets mutilated fish.
Yeah, and is it his mom? I don't know. It's fish is mom, fish is not fish, fish is dinner. Yeah. All right. Tell me what we learned, for what you guys could pick out about Vardaman in this section.
First of all, he blames kind of body for his mother's death. Yeah, on like page 53.
When he calls him that fat son of a bitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's running and screaming, he killed her, he killed her.
Mhm.
He's like, he's really upset. He's like vomiting and crying. And then, like, page 54 says, I can breathe vomiting it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Like, it's again that kind of grotesque imagery associated with Gothic or subgenre.
Yeah. Yeah. Southern Gothic for sure.
But it's, I don't think this is the first time he's had to actually deal with something this heavy. And, you know, he's still very young.
Mhm.
And to like suddenly have your mom just not there before the age of 10.
Yeah.
Or I also went to go look online last night just for like the movie trailer to
The James Franco one?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just to kind of see how others interpret Bartman's age.
Uh-huh.
And in that movie, he's like 3 or 4.
Oh, really?
He is tiny.
I haven't seen the movie. I should see that. Okay. Okay.
Um,
It's a little baby boy.
yeah. So, or he's like at the oldest 5-ish.
Okay.
And so he doesn't fully understand stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then he again starts talking about the fish, and the fish is like very like mutilated and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And Christiane was saying it could be he could be making a metaphor for of his mother,
Yeah.
but I feel like it's not him intentionally making it a metaphor, it's the author, because he's still too young to probably process the metaphor
Yes.
and stuff. He's a very literal person. So like most of the stuff he sees face value with,
Mm-hmm.
and then you mixes that with like his own imagination.
Yes. Okay, good. Good. Yeah, that moment where it says vomiting the crying and then I can breathe vomiting it, that is I think a sign of his imaginative ability to describe what he is feeling. He's not actually describing it out loud, but like to name that vomiting, that feels very true to me. Like if you are sobbing so hard that you're like gasping like that, doesn't that feel a lot like retching? Doesn't that feel a lot like vomiting? And so it's this way of like, maybe as adults, we're like, well, you're not actually vomiting, you're crying, you're sobbing, you're gasping for air, etc. But for this kid who maybe has not had that experience of like how language can delineate things, like how language can say, no, that's not vomiting, that is retching, or that's not vomiting, that is sobbing. It's like he hasn't entered that world yet, that adult world of how to describe things perfectly. But the way that he does describe it is visceral. Like Sammy said, it's grotesque. Like it actually feels maybe even more true than just calling it sobbing, because it creates this like unexpected description of something that feels very new, even as we like relate to it. I don't want to use the word relate, but like we totally understand it. And then a little bit later, Vardaman says, I am not crying now. I am not anything. Dewey-Dell comes to the hill and calls me. This is what Ash was talking about before too. Vardaman, I am not anything. I am quiet. You, Vardaman, I can cry quiet now, reeling and hearing my tears. First of all, what is he hitting in the, where is he in the section? He's in a barn. And what is he hitting? Peabody's horses. So he's like, Peabody killed my mom, because before Peabody was here, my mom was alive, and now Peabody came to our house and my mom is dead. So it must be Peabody. That's how his logic is working. He's correlating without, he's correlating and seeing the correlation between the two as causation. So here he goes into the barn and he's hitting these horses. And this is how he describes the moment after that. It says, it is dark. This is the last paragraph of the section. It is dark. I can hear wood, silence. I know them, but not living sounds, not even him. It is as though the dark were resolving him out of his integrity into an unrelated scattering of components, snuffing and stamping, smells of cooking flesh and ammoniac hair, an illusion of a coordinated whole of splotched hide and strong bones, within which, detached and secret and familiar, and is different from my is. I see him dissolve, legs, a rolling eye, a gaudy splotching like cold flames, and float upon the dark and fading solution. All one yet neither, all either yet none. I can see hearing coil toward him, caressing, shaping his hard shape, fetlock, hip, shoulder, and head, smell and sound. I am not afraid. Cooked in it, cooked in it. Okay. In that scene, he's looking at the horse. The him he is referring to is this horse. First, he says it is dark. I can hear wood. Silence. What does wood sound like? That is such an interesting moment of synesthesia, where you are hearing something that you are actually seeing. Like he's looking at wood and he's hearing it. What is it? Yeah.
Maybe it's like someone's walking.
Okay, so there could be a kind of like creaking then, or sort of footsteps. Yeah, Michaela?
I mean, for me, like whenever like I walk into like an all wood cabin, it's kind of just like not stuffy, but it's just like muffled. Like everything
Yes.
just feels like kind of subdued, and like there's like an extra barrier rather than like the other hard walls that we were used to, like, if it's just all wood, it kind of feels like just not as echoey, like it absorbs everything.
Yes, I love that. I think that's what he's hearing. Yeah, Remy, and then to Amy.
I think part of it could also be just that Cash is a carpenter, and so because Cash is a carpenter, that means he's inadvertently around the wood a lot. Secondhand experience.
Okay, good. So because he has sensed wood so much, he has this like more intimate knowledge of it where you can see it, you can hear it, you can touch it, like all the senses. Enoch?
Yeah, I was gonna say like, that's something to me. Hearing like the soft sounds associated with wood.
Interesting. So maybe he's still hearing the one lick less echoing. But I think what Michaela is saying about the silence is important because it uses the word silence. Like it's almost like sensory deprivation, and he's applying that to wood. And it says, I know them, but not living sounds, not even him. So he's like, I am actually not hearing even the horse. I'm not hearing the horse breathe or any of those sounds. So it does sound like the wood has kind of like muffled that sound. It is as though the dark were resolving him out of his integrity. Okay, what does that mean? He's talking about the horse. It's dark. He says, I can't even hear it. It's like the dark is closing in on the horse. And he says, resolving. What does it mean to resolve? Okay, to finish something, to complete it, right? A resolution, it has like a nice, like tidy conclusion. But he says it's resolving him out of his integrity. Do you see how that's contradictory, to resolve and then to resolve somebody out of integrity? Integrity is like a wholeness, right? Resolve and integrity kind of mean a similar thing, which is like integrity is like someone has like a sense of like self, a sense of whole self. But how can you be resolved out of integrity? This book gets trippy. Yeah.
I think he's kind of saying that in his mind, the dark is like taking a horse and cutting it into pieces.
Yes, good. And for him, that's a kind of resolving. It's not a dissolving, which we would normally think if the dark is letting him sort of like think of the horse in all of these different pieces. It's not dissolving it. He says this is a resolution. This is actually the way that we should be thinking about the horse, or maybe not should be, but it actually is a more complete way of thinking about the horse. So it says, into an unrelated scattering of components. There's snuffing and stamping. So there's the sound. There's the smell of cooling flesh and ammoniac hair, so the smell of it, an illusion of a coordinated whole, so this is the side of it, of splotched hide, so you can see the outside, and strong bones, which are on the inside, within which detached and secret and familiar, and is different from my is. So he's thinking about all the different parts of the horse and how all those different parts together make the horse a different identity than he is. He says, I see him dissolve, legs, a rolling eye, a gaudy splotching like cold flames, and float upon the dark in fading solution, all one, yet neither, all either, yet none. I love this image. I imagine him sort of like in the dark, and you know how it's so dark that like you just see like sort of vague shadows. I don't think he's completely blind here because he does talk about seeing, but it almost feels cartoonish where things are sort of like floating on. I think of like pink elephants on parade here, like things are sort of like floating in front of him, and he's seeing the horse kind of as it's all of its different parts rather than as a complete whole. And he says all one, like all of these things belong to this one horse, and yet it's none of these things at once. All either, like again, it can be all of these different things, and yet it's none of these different things. So he's like, what is being? That's what Barnum is thinking about here. So Kaylin and Tibet.
I think that's a really abstract thought for this young
Yes.
child, like the integrity of darkness.
Yes.
Don't
Yes.
know where he's getting these words.
One critic said that this book does astonishing violence to plausibility. And I think that's what he's talking about here. This idea that Vardaman as this little kid could have this abstract thought. Ben?
When I was first reading it, I kind of thought of like brutalist architecture.
Interesting. Why?
Because the way he describes the horse, it seems very clinical and almost visceral.
Yeah.
But if you think about it in nature, it's a beautiful thing. But the way this child thinks of this horse is, it's very brutal and it's kind of harsh.
Interesting. So brutalist architecture is the kind, remind me, it's the kind where like you can see all the workings of the building, right?
Yes and no. It uses a lot of concrete. It's trying not to be pleasing to the eye. It's
Yeah.
just when it seems.
Nothing, it doesn't want to seem like something it's not, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so when we look at brutalism here, to see it as brutal, we're thinking that we're not talking about the horse and its majesty or the horse and its beauty. We're just thinking about these functioning parts to it. It's not going to be anything but a horse. He also talks about I can see, hearing, coiled toward him, caressing, shaping his heart shape, fetlock, hip, shoulder, head, smell, and sound. I am not afraid. So for me, that starts to freak me out. I start thinking, okay, the horse is not horse, really, it's just feet and ears and head. And what makes it have its horseness? Is it just all these parts, I don't know, through a miracle of evolution, all these parts just came together and now that's a horse? That starts to get me thinking about existence. And I'm like, okay, if that's the horse, then what am I? I'm also just like nose, hair, whatever. We got to end. We'll come back to this. Think about this idea about whether or not you think the book is doing astonishing violence to plausibility, or if you think there's an explanation for how Vardaman's
This
talking.
age of childhood is when developmentally abstract thought begins to occur.
Oh,
This
interesting.
is how a child thinks about things, like in real life.
Maybe the fact that he's like closer.
Understanding things is cutting them into pieces and then pasting them together.
Excellent. I love that.
Interpretation of how young Barney
Interesting.
Localization is really
Interesting.
not-
This is in multiple movies then. Better pause this. Is the
I don't know.
Where you